Hello, my name is Tashism, and this is a deck tech for the Jund deck in the 7-point Highlander format. Instead of going on a long-winded explanation of what 7-point Highlander is, I'll just direct you to the description, where you can find the website explaining the rules and the points list. Plus, let's be honest, if you're watching this, you probably already know what you're looking at. So, historically, Jund is a grindy deck that has three types of cards. Cheap cards that interact with your opponent, undercosted, overpowered creatures, or cards that net you card advantage. This version of the deck has the additional caveat that I wanted to find a home for Lurrus of the Dream Den, mostly because that card is absurdly powerful and was banned in two Eternal formats 3 days after it was released in paper. To be fair, one of those bannings was overturned after the companion rules change, but it's still a stupid powerful card. I actually started off trying to abuse Lurrus in a blue-black Time Vault deck, but after testing a bunch, I found that I never got Lurrus while playing that deck. A friend of mine told me that he thought Lurrus was better in grindy decks, so out of pure frustration, I posted a message a few days later in our Discord saying, quote, Lurrus is better in grindy decks, end quote. Fine, here's Jund. So, because of Lurrus, we have a few different cards that wouldn't go in normal Jund decks, but that's because they go so well with Lurrus. For example, Mishra's Bauble and Urza's Bauble. These are both cards that really don't have effects that matter, in the sense that, yes, you can look at a card at random in your opponent's hand, or you can look at the top card of a player's library. Yours or your opponent's. Fetch lands matter here. So that part doesn't really matter, but the fact that they slow trip or draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep is actually pretty good, especially with Lurrus. You know, you crack one of these early, then you play Lurrus on turn, normally 3 if we had the old companion rule, but let's say 4 or 5, maybe even 6 if you get and cast Lurrus on the same turn. You get the engine going immediately of drawing a card right out of your graveyard. Cast Lurrus, get the bauble, crack the bauble. We also have Seal of Fire, a repeatable removal spell, great for grindy cards, grindy matchups. Also, we have Croxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. You have not lived until you've started recurring that guy with Lurrus. It was a nightmare in Standard on Magic Arena, and it's not too much better to play against on Magic Online in this format. And lastly, we also have Nile's Spellbomb. That way we get to have main deck Graveyard Hate. Not the only piece that you'll see here, but it's main deck Graveyard Hate that also draws you a card too. It's 2 mana, but it's actually an effect that draws you a card and does something instead of just drawing a card and going, it's a negligible effect. To go over the rest of the deck, we've got Death Shadow, which is actually a package I didn't think I'd want to put in here, but I do have Death Shadow and Scourge of the Skyclaves. These cards, like I said, weren't things that I initially thought I was going to put into the deck until I was looking at Lurrus decks and old Jund decks and saw that people were playing cards like that. And let's be fair, life totals are going to go down very quickly, for this deck at least. You've got cards like Painful Truth, Night's Whisper, Blood Crit, the shock lands, your fetch lands. Your life total will get fairly low fairly quickly, and being able to power out a undercosted threat with high power and toughness is absolutely what this deck wants to do. Moving forward, you've got Duress, Fatal Push, Inquisition, Thoughtseize. These all fall under that first category of cards, cheap cards that interact with your opponent. Being able to take cards out of their hand is absolutely something that Jund wants to do. And Fatal Push, I don't feel like I should need to explain it too much, but if I do, it is a 1-drop spell that can kill a 4-drop creature with minimal effort and no upside for your opponent. That's mana efficient if I've ever seen it. Up next, we've got Unearth. Unearth, great card, brings back your creatures, also brings back Lurrus. Not a requirement. You don't have to have Lurrus in play for this deck to be good, but it really helps. So Unearth is another card that gets you there. Moving forward, Lightning Bolt, cheap, efficient removal, or just 3 to the face. Seal of Fire, we've already talked about. Crop Rotation. Now, moving on to that, something else you don't normally see in Jund, I've put a Life from the Loam and Crop Rotation package in here. Nothing too deep. We don't have Thespian Stage Dark Depths, no Tabernacle at the Pendrell Vale, nothing like that. But we do have some good cards. Grove of the Burn Willows, for example. That goes really well with your Punishing Fire. It does another Same thing as Seal of Fire with Lurrus, just a recurring, grindy way to kill your opponent's creatures, or kill your opponent even if you want to nug them for one a turn. You can go get Caracas. Card's great, let's be honest. Not only does it combo with your Croxa, it also bounces, what have you from your opponent. 7-point Highlander, and this is something I will probably say several times during this video, but it's a very sweet format. With a sweet format, you get all these fun cards to play with. Gristlebrand, any overpowered, big, dumb creatures, also the smaller creatures. Thalia is another card you can get rid of with this. Opposing Lurruses, Uro, although it's not the best feeling to bounce the opponent's Uro back to their hand when they can just keep doing it. It's not something you want to do often, but hey, if you want to at least slow them down from being able to swing with a 6/6 that gains 3 life and draws them a card every turn, it's a way to do that. On top of that, you can also go get Volrath's Stronghold. Not the most impressive card, but it does help you grind. It also helps you get back your Lurrus if it dies. That's a sub-theme I like having, is making sure I have means to get my Lurrus back. And then you, of course, have Strip Mine and Wasteland. Those are cards that go great with Renin 6 and Life from the Loam. Needless to say, being able to lock your opponents out with these sorts of cards is a unfair and unfun for your opponent. It is more fun for you, though. Way to win the game. Moving on, Hex Drinker, another undercosted, overpowered threat. Sometimes you just want to power that sucker up to level 3. So it's a 4 mana, 4/4 protection from instance creature. And if you can get it up to that 6/6 protection from everything, you're probably going to kill your opponent quickly. Traverse the Ulvenwald. Great card. It's not very hard to get Delirium going in this deck. You sacrifice a land, fetch land, crack one of your baubles, maybe duress them, and push a creature, and there you go. You've got your Delirium. That way you can tutor out any one of your utility creatures. There are a few in this deck. We'll talk about them later. Or even if you need to fix your mana, say you're under a Blood Moon effect or something, and you need to go get a snow-covered swamp to be able to cast your Abrupt Decay or an Assassin's Trophy, Traverse the Ulvenwald can do that for you fairly well. Deathrite Shaman, this is a card I don't think really needs much of an explanation. It's stupid good. It's a card that people have said they think needs a point. I agree, but I'm not going to complain, and I will play that card because it is fantastic. Skull Clamp is kind of another weird one. I have it in here because I also have Bitter Blossom and Young Pyromancer in the deck. Ways to just generate card advantage off of either this creature or this enchantment. Ways to go wide a little bit. Also, being able to pay 1 mana to draw 2 cards is really powerful, and I really like effects like that. Up next, we've got Animate Dead. If you're playing a lot of discard spells, Duress, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, well, maybe not so much Duress, but Inquisition and Thoughtseize, Hymn to Turok, Croxa are all ways to knock cards out of your opponent's hand. If you get something really powerful into their graveyard, absolutely find a way to get it back into play on your side. Animate Dead is kind of a card that can get you free wins, or even bring back, once again, your Lurrus. Or if you have your Lurrus in play, you can bring back your Animate Dead from the graveyard to get more advantage off of that. Collective Brutality kind of falls under that cheap interaction with your opponent, but it also can be slight card advantage. I know it's parity for the most part, but it does do multiple things for 1 or 2 cards. It feels really great to cast a Brutality, take a card out of their hand, and kill a creature at the cost of discarding an extra land you may not need, something you've gotten back up with Life from the Loam, for example. Up next, Dark Confidant. It is a undercosted creature that's absurdly powerful, and it generates card advantage very quickly. You see that the converted mana cost of this deck is pretty low. You've got, 25 0-drops, lands, and the 2 artifacts, 14 1-drops, 18 2-drops, and 3 3-drops. That's where it stops, so you're not going to take enough damage to kill yourself with Dark Confidant, and if you lower your life total a bit, it helps with the Scourge of the Skyclaves and the Death Shadow package. Up next is Night's Whisper. Draw 2 cards, lose 2 life for 1 in the black. You could play Sign in Blood for the ability to maybe burn out your opponent if you really wanted to, but I think making sure you don't have too much double black in the deck is a good idea. Speaking of double black, though, we do have Hymn to Turok. Card's just absurdly powerful. I don't think there's too much to say about this. You could hit your opponent on turn 2 with that, knock out some lands, and maybe win the game from there. You've got Punishing Fire and Young Pyromancer. We already talked about those, as well as Life from the Loam. Although Life from the Loam is really good, just I want to add on to that. And Wrenn and 6, we'll just lump those two together. They're both really great, not only for bringing back cards like Wasteland and Strip Mine. You also have your fetch lands. Being able to just constantly get lands out of your deck is really good. Also, Nurturing Peatland, being able to just get back your draw card land to get additional cards that way. Or you've got your Sheltered Thicket, which is right here, a cycling land that once again draws you cards and taps for mana if you really need to play that. It's really all around powerful effects like that, so you can get extra card advantage off of that. Scavenging Ooze, just a great card. Another piece of graveyard hate for your deck. People do like playing cards out of their graveyards. Uro, for example, is a card that is really powerful in this format, and a card I've seen a lot in testing. I'm sure people are going to be finding ways to abuse that card. So Scavenging Ooze, just being a bear that can take care of that along with other things, is a very good card to have in the deck. Sylvan Library is probably one of my favorite cards. I think I bought 8 of them before the big Commander boom, maybe even more, just because I loved playing them in any deck or every deck. It was a card that really encapsulates the pay life for additional cards mantra. It is a very powerful card. Plus, it's really good with fetch lands. You know, draw 3, like, okay, I'll put back these 2 useless cards, crack a fetch land, I get some fresh looks. It is a fantastic card. It's cheap. It fits right in with what Jund wants to do. Tarmogoyf is a big, dumb creature for 2 mana. That card is still really good. I know it's starting to be outclassed by other cards in the 2020, 2019, 2021 sort of era of Magic card creation, but Tarmogoyf's still really good. Dreadbore, just a catch-all creature or planeswalker removal spell. Keeping on my I hate Simic cards, Uro gets blown up by this card, so does Oko. Any other powerful planeswalkers. It's just a catch-all. Planeswalkers are really good and probably going to get played a lot in this format, so being able to destroy them fairly cheaply is a great thing to do. We've already talked about Kroxa. Abrupt Decay and Assassin's Trophy are just catch-all removal spells, destroying cheap planeswalkers once again, creatures, enchantments, artifacts. A lot of things get tagged by Abrupt Decay. Assassin's Trophy really is the catch-all, destroy target permanent. That's all you need. 2 mana. Sure, they get a basic land, and that doesn't really help if you're trying to wasteland lock your opponent out of the game. But let me tell you, when you blow up a 5 mana permanent with your Assassin's Trophy, sure, it feels fantastic. Wrenn and 6, once again, card's great. Lets you start locking your opponent out of the game with Waste or Strip, get advantage off your Canopy land, Nurturing Peatland as it is in this format, or even Sheltered Thicket. Also, the -1 shooting something or the -7 getting an emblem just flat out wins you a game. Now, to be fair, that does that with most planeswalkers, but Wrenn and 6 emblem is really good. And then finally, getting up to our 3 drops. Painful Truths, fantastic card. Draw 3 cards, lose 3 life for 3 mana. I love it. You're probably going to have your mana set up very easily. There's a lot. Fetches, shocks, duels. A lot of enough mana to make sure that you can hit all of your mana pips in early turns. Now, Blood Moon effects would probably wreck us a little bit, I'll be completely honest, although that's why you have your cheap removal spells like Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, so on and so forth. But being able to draw 3 for 3 is really good. Losing 3 life is slightly negligible, especially when you have cards like, once again, Death Shadow and Scourge of the Skyclaves. Moving on, Kolaghan's Command. Commands are great. This one is really good. A Shatter effect, a Shock effect, returning a creature. Once again, I'll harp on bringing Lurrus back, or even bringing back any of your other things. This is a card that generates card advantage for sure. Also, making your opponent discard a card at instant speed is not something to be laughed at. You know, getting them in their upkeep, 0 cards they draw, in their draw step, returning a creature and making them discard the card they had, gets you right there. It's great. And then lastly for the main deck, Maelstrom Pulse. Okay, destroying a permanent and all other permanents, not the most exciting in a Highlander format, but hitting tokens is not something that is negligible. That is an effect that can help out sometimes. Tokens are a real threat. Monastery Mentor tokens, monk tokens. Or even, I know that we're playing Young Pyromancer, but elemental tokens from Young Pyromancer are things that you can kill all at once. Moving on to the sideboard, of course, first and foremost, Lurrus. I'm sorting by converted mana cost. I've got Lurrus at the far left because you're never going to sideboard him in. He will always be your commander, for lack of a better word. So, moving on. In our 0-drop slots, we've got 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate. First of all, Bajuka Bog, land you can go get with crop rotation, or even play for your turn. And then you've got Tormod's Crypt. Not too much to say there. Graveyard decks are something that I have on my mind when I'm trying to build this, or making sure that we have outs to someone who's trying to bring in a big dumb fatty really fast is definitely something that we wanted to do. Moving on, we've got Gorilla Shaman. Cheap artifacts are a problem. For example, the Urza deck. They're playing Mox, Opal, Chrome Mox, other really cheap things, even artifact lands to make sure their Tolarian Academy taps for a bunch of mana. Gorilla Shaman is a cheap way to continuously eat these cards, so they don't have them in play, so you can either cut them off their mana, cut them off their abilities, so on and so forth. Then you've got your 1-drop anti-blue package, Pyroblast, Red Blast, and Veil of Summer. Pyroblast and Red Blast, pretty easy to explain. Counter target blue spell, destroy target blue permanent. It's really powerful. It's 1 mana. And Veil of Summer is a 1 mana cryptic command. I don't need to explain how good 1 mana cryptic command is. Moving on. Okay, this deck is a dog to fast combo decks. I won't lie. It stinks. It's not something I'm happy about, but someone going off really fast is bad for this deck. So with that, try to shore that up just a little bit in the sideboard. Thorn of Amethyst and Sphere of Resistance. These are cards that definitely make it possible to slow down those decks until your disruption starts to hit. Making your spells cost more, especially when we cast several spells in a turn, definitely helps out. Null Rod and Collector Oof, those are also cards that are really good against artifacts. The aforementioned Urza decks really get cut off by Null Rod and Collector Oof. Making your artifacts not able to do things is multi bene. Cindervines and Seal of Primordium. Cindervines, another card that's great versus those fast combo decks if they're trying to cast a lot of spells. Let's be honest, dealing points of damage to them while they're doing stuff is great, and then also being able to naturalize something is pretty good. Seal of Primordium is just a naturalize that gets recurred by Lurrus. Same for Cindervines. These are synergies that are not laughable. Okay, so these last 2 cards are a little weird, and that's why I saved them for last. First of all, we've got Orcus Settlers. Jund is traditionally also bad against big mana decks. In Modern, Jund versus Tron is a nightmare for Jund. I know Tron does not exist in this format as is, but decks that want to get lots of lands into play seems like something that should exist. The format's strange right now and really wide open. I'll touch on that a little more later, but being able to blow up multiple lands at once seems really good. We don't get Fulminator Mage in this deck because Lurrus says two drops or less, so we don't get that kind of tech. So Orcus Settler seems like the next best sort of thing to cast if it survives, which I know is a big if, but if it survives next turn, you could blow up 2 or 3 lands. Then the turn after that, rebuy Orcus Settlers, and just keep recurring. Not the perfect plan, but it is something that gives you an option and a chance against the bigger mana decks, because you're trying to keep them low to the ground with your cheap spells and your cheap effects, and if your opponent drops a Worm Coil Engine, there's not a lot of great ways for this deck to beat that, or an Eldrazi barring a Karakas. So it's really bad for you if they can get to big mana real fast, which is why that you want to make sure you have cards like Orcus Settlers to blow them up out of the sideboard, or you've got, of course, your Wasteland, your Strip Mine, so on and so forth. And then last but not least is an Judge's absolute nightmare, Chains of Mephistopheles. To be frank, the quickest way to explain this is a flowchart. Now, the flowchart is if you draw a card that isn't the first card you drew on a turn, discard a card. Did you discard a card? Yes, then draw a card. Did you discard a card? No, instead mill a card. It's great versus decks that want to draw lots of cards. The high velocity Xerox decks, I guess is the best way to put them. Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, Gush. Anyone that's trying to go fully crazy, Wheel of Fortune time, Spiral time, Twister, this just shuts that right down. So it's a 2-drop card that just says, no, we're going to play this fair. Stop it. So now let's move on to the matchups. This deck thrives when it's grinding out against decks. Slower combo type decks, such as Grixis Oracle, are pretty decent matchups. Also, any creature-based decks have a hard time against this much removal and huge threats. Also, once again, Punishing Fire, Seal of Fire, recurring them with either Grove or Lurrus absolutely makes those matchups pretty easy when you get to have a Wrath without having to kill your own guys. As previously mentioned, this deck is disadvantaged against fast combo. If the meta is going to be a lot of that, you should not play this deck. Otherwise, it's just going to be a nightmare and a headache for you. And that's the easiest way to find yourself in the loser's bracket. Now, the red matchup, it's not terrible either, which is important since that deck is probably going to be all over the place, having done well at the last tournament as of date of recording. Although, this format is full of sweet blue cards, and your tournament grinders love to play sweet blue cards, so who knows? Now, I'd love to talk more about the deck's matchups, but there really isn't a defined metagame at the moment. We'll probably have a better idea of what it's going to be like once we get the massive Week 1 deck dump this Sunday, but until then, it's kind of a crapshoot of what we might see. But anyway, there you have it. Lurrus Jund for 7-point Highlander. Hope you enjoy the deck tech, and if you've not played this format yet, it really is sweet. So check out the link below to find all the information, including the Discord, and thank you for watching.